People who take walks at night, what's the scariest thing you've seen? I once saw tiny hands reaching out of a sewer grate. Took me a minute before I realized it was a raccoon. Was creeped out until the second sentence, and now it just sounds cute. I can just imagine the raccoon like, "Friend, please, I need a hand, can you get me out of here?" A 7 feet tall male brown kangaroo in the middle of the footpath. Buff as fuck, just staring me down. You bet your ass I turned and went the other way. He just went about his business. There was news report a while ago about a super large and buff kangaroo that would beat up dog walkers. Safe to say that I'm not going to Australia anytime soon. Was up on a hill in the countryside at midnight when a man with a rifle came out of nowhere, ran right past me, and wasn't seen again. I went home shortly after that. Living in a rural village, I was taking a late night walk with my girlfriend, when suddenly we hear aloud what we thought was a human scream. Turned out it was a sheep. Jump scared us hard though. Oh man. When my wife and I were stoners, we took our bong out back and we turned the lights off, and when I was mid-hit I hear a god-awful scream followed by the ground pounding of something large running to use from the woods. My wife ran in and slammed the door behind her and I almost couldn't get in. Found out a few months later it was a deer screaming and it jumped over the broken fence. I was super stoned and that was the most awful experience I've ever had because I couldn't move fast enough. One time I turned around to see what was behind me just out of intuition, and I saw someone step behind a tree rather quickly and try to hide from me. I stood there for a second to confirm this, then I speed walked home. Fucking creepy. Speed walked. I would have Usain bolted out of there. Seeing is scary, but hearing and not seeing is fucking terrifying. You bet it is. A good example I can bring to the table is the sound of a rabbit screaming while you hear the low growling of either a raccoon or a cougar trying to silence it. I hope it wasn't the latter, because this happened right near my backyard. I heard the same, but it was an owl shredding the rabbit. I did not expect it to be such a big bird. It was like a fire hydrant covered with feathers sitting there munching on Thumper. What I thought was a body in the woods, and after a bit of back and forth on the phone with the police I returned with a few helpful coppers to find a slightly miffed drunk person who'd had an argument with his missus. What was there to go back and forth about? Body in the woods isn't emergency enough? Are you sure that's not just a drunk person who'd had an argument with his missus? Almost 100% sure I witnessed a kidnapping. I was going to get my mail late at night while living in an apartment complex, and on the way back I noticed a woman in her pajamas surrounded by a few men right by a car. There was an argument and looked like they forced her in the car and drove off. I found her slipper nearby on the grass. I of course called the police and they came and I let them know what I saw, but I never found out what actually happened. Similar experience here. In high school, late at night walking home from a friend's house maybe a mile away. Halfway car comes cruising super slowly down the street. I hear someone screaming in the car. I was sure they were calling for help. I start following the car, and as I get on the phone with the cops the car starts pumping the gas, so I just run after them and try to follow them. But I lost them pretty quickly. Never learned what really happened. I hate the lack of resolution, like I want to know if this person ended up okay or not. I still think about it and worry about what happened. I just always remember finding that slipper and chills going down my spine. I live out in the country, more woods and fields around me than houses. There are several dirt paths through the woods that farmers use for their tractors and all during the day. I like to run on these paths because it's usually quiet and no traffic, unlike the road. During the hottest part of the summer I run at night because it's cooler outside. So one night, it had rained during the day, so all the tracks on the path were gone. I was out running around midnight. I had an uneasy feeling but didn't see anything. But then I circled around, and on my second pass down a particular way, I saw my footprints, but then I saw another set of prints, bigger than mine, that hadn't been there before. Then I saw they made the turn the same way I had earlier. I cut it short that night, never saw anyone, but still. Wow, I did not expect all this, lol, thanks for the awards. The parts of the path where you only saw one pair of footprints? That's when Bigfoot was carrying you. More backpacking than a walk, but this fucking terrifies me to this day. Our planned camping spot for the night was full. We'd backpacked all day to get to that location, and there wasn't anywhere close to set up our tents. We called our guy on the outside to come pick us up as it was getting late. We didn't have anywhere to set up camp, and a storm was approaching. We hiked to the nearest exit point on the trail, met our pickup guy, and he drove us a few miles to the nearest campsite we were familiar with that we could basically drive up to. Long logging path pretty deep in the mountains that we had hiked to in previous years, so we were kind of familiar with the area. Anyways, we hop out of the van and it's pitch black out. No moon, it's April in the mountains and still pretty chilly. We're cold, hungry, and exhausted. That's when we notice this mother F staring at us from behind a tree. I know this sounds like a no-sleep story, but it's 100% true and probably the most scared I've ever been. We notice this guy, no headlamp, no equipment, no backpack, just standing there. One of our group, former Marine, yells at him to come out and explain what his deal is. This guy walks a few feet out from behind the tree and we all shine our lights on him, and I shit you not, this dude's white t-shirt is covered in what looks like blood smears. He's pretty rough looking, long hair, long beard, crazy eyes, and he was wearing a bloody t-shirt and shorts in 35-degree weather at night. We're all pretty freaked out, and this is a pretty experienced group of hikers who've seen some shit. We ask this guy what his deal is and he says we can't camp here. We tell him that that's exactly what we plan to do, and he says I don't think that's a good idea for any of you. We kind of turn to discuss as a group, and when we look back he's hidden back behind the tree. As a group we basically decided none of us were getting any sleep that night if we stayed here, so we packed up the van and left. As we were pulling out, this guy pulled out one of those red filtered flashlights and ran after our van. I'm not kidding, he followed us for at least a quarter mile on foot. He was fast as fuck. We passed a park ranger on the road and flagged him down to tell him how weird that dude was acting, and he said he'd go investigate. I didn't hear anything about it again for 5 years. For the longest time I thought he was probably some pot farmer who had a nearby plot, or a moonshiner who was just living in the woods and didn't want us near his still. People hunt all the time out there, which would maybe explain the blood a little bit. But I was recently at an event with some of those guys again for the first time in years, and that creepy dude from the woods got brought up. One of them who still lives nearby broke out his phone and said, I forgot to tell you guys, I saw him again. Pulls up a news article and there he was. So obviously the same guy. He'd been arrested for murdering some poor girl on the trail. Timelines didn't match up, so I fully believe we saw this guy shortly after he'd murdered someone else. He hasn't been charged with anything else as far as I'm aware. I'm not backpacking without a gun anymore. One of my old professors was a Florida wildlife officer. He would oftentimes be the only officer within a 10 to 15 mile radius in the middle of the Everglades. He had some wild stories of shit that he's seen, but the one that stuck out to me the most was when he told us about a time that he saw a truck in a road where it shouldn't have been and let the guy off with a warning. He was somewhat new to the force and decided that he didn't want to harass some guy fishing, so he let him go. A few hours later he saw the naked body of a woman in her early 20s further down the road. He contacted state/county law enforcement with a description of the guy and the tag numbers. The vehicle was found in Orlando months later abandoned, and the owner was the dead lady they found in the Everglades. They never caught the guy driving the truck. The truck had not been reported as stolen and the lady was not reported as missing. He said he felt an immense amount of guilt after that because he was trying to be a cool cop and didn't ask the guy for ID or registration or anything, just told him he can't be fishing there at that time and let him go on his way. Thank you for listening to another B-Town Reddit Stories episode. Hit the subscribe button and check out our channel for more stories. Let us know your opinion about this topic in the comments.